Yo dudes, how's it going? Hope everyone's doing well. I appear to have the Boris Posh Boy lockdown thing going on, so hopefully it won't be too much longer before life goes back to normal. Video today, so I got the Stance Plus coilovers fitted a couple of months ago. I've done a few thousand miles since, and so I've got quite a good bit of driving behind me on varied roads. So I thought what I would do was just go for a bit of a drive, a couple of different kinds of roads and things like that, and just give you an idea of exactly what they are like to have on the van. So let's go. Okay, so firstly let's preface this that I'm obviously not an expert. I'm not claiming to be an expert. It's literally my own opinion, so take it with a pinch of salt, because realistically it doesn't really matter that much. And basically when I put them on, I've essentially said the reasons why I went for this kit. Firstly, price point. Secondly, I couldn't find a negative review about it anywhere that I looked, which in this day and age online is a pretty hard thing to do. And then finally, what was the first one? Right. And finally, handling. It's a van. You know, it's a van. At the end of the day, it's not a track car. I'm not trying to do anything amazing with it. It doesn't need to have the best suspension on in the world. So what we're going to do is break it down into the different roads. This is the main road that I would drive on, with dual carriageway, essentially the A1 up and down to sort of Sheffield area and back. And that's like 90% of my driving. The rest of it's either round town, or should I go mountain biking, a little bit of country roads. So for most of what I'm doing, which is this, it's absolutely fine. It is noticeably firmer than it was before I got it done, which is to be expected. It claims, I think it's a 40% increase in firmness. But you know, I'm not bouncing around that much. When it hits a bump, it deals with it really well, so there's not really like an after effect where, you know, I've been in some lowered cars where they just bounce pretty much after you hit a bump. They're not, and I would say that was down to damping, so they're not damped especially well. Whereas this, it hits it, it absorbs it, and then just carries on. Now, that's what I'm talking about there, is when you're on a dual carriageway, which in all honesty is relatively smooth. You know, they're built to be smooth, they're not bumpy. So with regards to if you're doing a lot of motorway driving, I would say basically there is no issue at all. Even around town, even as low as I've got it, I've only had 2 speed bumps that I've had issues with, apart from getting in and out of where I live. And that's because it's like the mother of all speed bumps, which basically, unless I hit it at an extreme angle, which isn't always possible due to how people park, it scrapes a little bit. There's actually a little thing that hangs down just in front of the front wheel, and I think it's that's scraping a little bit, but that's not an issue. I kind of expected that to happen. But just general speed bumps, there's 2 that have caught me out, and the only reason they did is because I tried to be clever about it. Rather than slow down and actually go around the side of it, I just tried to go over the middle of it. So I know not to do that in future and be a bit more cautious. But you've got to experiment with these things. Now, front and back. So let's talk about front and back a little second before we get on a country road or a B road. So front and back. Now, obviously it's a van, so I would say the front suspension is what I would refer to as normal suspension, basically, like any car would have. And whilst it is a bit firmer, it does, like, it's very compliant with the road. Like I said, it's not bouncy after you hit a bump. It kind of absorbs it, deals with it, and moves on. And that's kind of what you want in a suspension. Now, because it's a van, the back end, and on a Caddy especially, actually has leaf springs. Now, leaf springs are a bit prehistoric. They used to put them on horses and carts. So not only is it a leaf spring, but it's a leaf spring not loaded for the van, it's loaded for the load rating of the van. So it's heavily overspringed anyway, because it's a van that's supposed to carry loads. So the van at the back is noticeably a lot firmer than it was originally before having it lowered, which isn't really much of an issue. Like I said, you hit a bump and it absorbs it really well. I've never bottomed out in it over hitting a bump. I've never had any scraping of the tyres or anything like that. So overall, it's pretty decent. There is one area that I noticed that it seems to be a weak point, and I can't decide whether that's to do with the shock or whether that's to do with the original leaf spring that's on the suspension. But there's an example along here, and I'm going to show you exactly what it does, because it's something to be a bit cautious of. So whilst this is now a B road, it's certainly not a back road. Back roads, whilst we're going down here and before we get to the spot, back roads I would be very cautious of in this. You could not just like you can hoon it down a back road and nothing will be fine. The back will be bouncing all over the place, and like I said, it's because of this that I'm about to show you now and what happens. So the majority of the time it's fine. Like I said, the back end is noticeably a lot firmer, but you're not bouncing all over the place. And when you hit what is considered to be probably quite a big bump, then the back end obviously absorbs it. You can see like obviously how much I'm moving, but the back end absorbs it quite well and then goes back to how it was. However, the weak point is if you have multiple bumps in a row. And whilst I can't decide whether it doesn't recover fast enough, or alternatively, whether it's just too much, well, that would be too much for the suspension to take. I can't decide whether it doesn't. So I can't decide whether it just doesn't recover fast enough, or alternatively, whether it's just because of the firmness in the rear and hitting the bumps over and over that seems to make it worse. But it seems to get, if you hit a couple in a row, it seems to get sort of progressively a little bit worse than it did originally. Sorry, the GoPro decided to be a dick again. Anyways, but in conclusion, like, I know the kind of miles that I do mainly. I know what I was wanting out of it, and basically it ticks the boxes. I've got no complaints with it at all. Like I said, the back end issue, if I was driving on B roads that were quite bumpy, that would get on my nerves, but that's not something that I do. It would be interesting to have a direct comparison between like this suspension and the Bilstein suspension back to back along the same roads to see sort of what kind of differences the extra money buys you. But as a whole, I'm very happy with the suspension. And this, I mentioned that if it's terrible, I may think about changing it in a few years or whatever. I'm just going to keep the same suspension. There's no issues with it. I'm happy, like I said. And that's it for this video. So I hope it was useful to you. Like I said, if you've got any questions, pop them in the comments below. I try to make it as clear as possible. And the difference between the front and the back being leaf springs as well. And just the fact that, you know, one bump's fine, but if you hit a couple of bumps, you start to get sort of moved around and you see quite a bit. But yeah, other than that, I hope you got something out of the video, and I'll see you soon for my next one. Cheers, thanks, bye.